Okay, good afternoon, and happy Memorial Day. Going to circle back here. This is week two of CS110. What I'm like to do is I'm going to do a kind of get got a couple things I want to touch base on right now regarding, I guess, the structure of the class, kind of how we're going. I think I've got a couple folks who have followed up, a couple things I want to catch up on, and also kind of uh, establish a roadmap for as we're kind of moving through. As we said before last week, this is a relatively short semester, so this is a 6 week course. So we tend to move fairly quickly through it. So trying to get things on track and getting things sorted out is always going to be important at the outset. All right, um, so a couple of things we talked about last week. Um, Introductions. So need to. I've had some folks in the class have gone ahead and submitted their introductions, but not everybody yet. So I need to have everybody. I would ask everyone to go out. Um, I'm not looking for anything super complicated, but as we say here, major something interesting. Where you're from or what you do or what you want to get out of this class. And this is much for both. Um, Myself and for everybody else who's in the class. The fact that we're in the meeting, we meet online is a little bit of a challenge in terms of engagement. So I think it's one of the things I'm trying to do with this is trying to get some sort of at least grounding around kind of who we are and communication, which I think, if we pull this off, I think, you know, online education can be very effective, but it assumes that you've got all this in place. All right. So if you haven't done your introductions yet, please, I would request that you go ahead and do that. If you follow through on just clicking it and kind of adding it. All right. So basically, just adding a new discussion topic. All right. All right. So then I've added lectures. So what I'd put out last week was I'd put the video lectures. Well, this is the introduction from last week. Um, I have lectures one and lecture two. So lecture one is kind of the overall information systems overview. Um, Lecture two was focused on hardware. All right, so this is the video recordings associated with that. This week we're going to be talking about, with topic three and topic four, we're talking about software and data and databases. There are four. The thing to keep in mind there's really four sort of fundamental building block components that make up information technology. It's hardware, software, network, and data. And the hardware and software components have been there since the very first computers that were put together in the 1940s. So they were hardware and software. Now, the mechanics of them and the scale of them and kind of what they do and how they do things have changed, but the mechanics of them in terms of a hardware component and a software component really has not changed. All right. The things that have changed, so those have been out there. The things that we've probably have seen more um, changes and have become much more impactful for topics or excuse me, four and five. All right. So topics four, we talk about data and databases. All right. So a couple of different things. The difference between data, information, knowledge. What is a database? Kind of how the mechanics of how a database works. Um, and then next week we're going to talk about networking, which is the next big piece. The thing that's interesting is hardware and software have been around probably the longest. Networking really did not has been around in different forms, but what we think of as networking, kind of AKA the internet, really did not come into, I guess, general usage until the early 1990s. So compared to hardware and software, it's a relative newcomer, but it's probably, I would argue, the thing that has made computing it has really kind of unlocked computing and has driven the utilization of it, how it works and what it does has been probably one of the most significant things. And then, and as we're talking this week, we're talking about data and databases. I would argue over the past 10 years, what we've seen is simply an explosion of data. We right now we are swimming in oceans and oceans of data, and we're able to generate and capture and analyze data that we have never ever been able to do before, and we're discovering a lot of interesting things about that. Um, some good, and some maybe not quite so good. I think one of the byproducts of the idea of social networking and using computing power in terms of our in social engagements. We've obviously seen what the positives are, but obviously there's a the byproduct of that is the ability to around privacy and being able to how do you protect privacy and how do you ensure privacy and how do you ensure that data because actually data has tremendous amounts of value. And what we're seeing is organizations that have been built, the major organizations that have been built around data, Google, as well as Facebook and Twitter and other social media, are all basically are built on the foundation of data. So so there's a lot of interesting things going on around that. I would argue that hardware and software have been around since the dawn of computing. Networking was really the driver from the 90s up to today in terms of the driving the value and the utility of computing. And then over the past 10 years, we've seen data. So it's kind of the evolution. So what we're focused on right now is going to be topics 3, which we talk about software, and topics 4. All right. Now, the other thing I want to try to jumpstart here, trying to get going, and I did not realize this when I first had set this up, is with the discussions. All right. What had happened was I had actually had set up I had brought this over and I had set it up. Did not realize I had not set up the discussion questions. All right. So if anybody had gone out there and we're looking for the questions, so not so much worried about number 1, but what I've done is I've gone back and I've added questions. I've added discussion topics for topics 2 around hardware, topics 3 around software, as well as topics 4 around data and databases. All right. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to ask everybody to do is go back to 2. Go back, it was last week, but go back into our topic discussions. And I've added 3 questions out there. So what we're looking for is I'm looking for, questions of, I'm trying to think of, so these are really kind of topics that are meant to drive discussion. So, one like on the hardware side, um, a couple questions I have out there, and I'm looking to gate your. It's not necessarily looking for a right answer or a wrong answer, but I'm getting more around kind of getting you to kind of think about some of the stuff and some of the implications of it. So I have so the 3 questions I have around from the hardware side was like first question was how many computers do you have? Take an inventory. Think about what you own. What you use. No, I mean it's not. Remember, computing devices are not necessarily limited to computers. So obviously, computers are one type of computing device, but smartphones are another type. You televisions, any number of devices that think about an automobile. So just kind of think about that and kind of put together an inventory. That's one. That would be one question. Another question would be around what to do with old computers. What's happening with old computers? What do you do with old computers? Right now, I'm looking at a stack of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 old computers. I've had sitting around. I kind of stack them up. But the question is, if everybody has at least says 5 old computers, or once again, can it be phones? Can be other things? All these types of electronic devices. What some thoughts around that. And then finally, the question of are computers computers and speed. One of the things we've always said about computers are they get faster and faster and cheaper and cheaper. Um, what happens? Will that, and that's been, and it's been the hallmark of this, of the industry. Question is, okay, does that last forever? Will that last forever? And what happens if it ever stops? And so those are some topic questions I've put out there, for on the hardware side. On the software side, hmm, on the software side, when it comes back. Okay, excellent. On the software questions or discussion topics, three questions here. This idea of software testing. Everything the question of how important is it to test software? What are the types of things that we want to think about with software testing? And how important is software testing? Um, second discussion question is, why is software so hard? It's you know you would think if there are all these years, it would be easier to write programs. But programming is still a pretty human thing. I mean, it's built by hand, it's developed by people by hand. So it's how does that um, why is that? What are some of the reasons why that would why software is so hard to do? And then finally, the question of what if, from a business perspective, is it better to be in the hardware business or better to be in the software business? And just as I said, I'm kind of looking to get these are kind of thought provoking or kind of thought generating types of discussion points. Right? And as we said here, what we're looking for is about 100-word kind of paragraphs of your thoughts around it. So I'm not looking, I'm looking for something obviously more than 3 words, but less than an encyclopedia. All right. And it's that once again, and then I'm also looking for you to respond, whatever questions you would pick, um, whatever question we pick, respond back to it. All right. For other people. So once again, trying to start a bit of a dialogue, kind of back and forth, get your thoughts, get your ideas around some of these different topic areas. All right. And then with regard to the third one, which is going to be, or actually topic 4, which is our data and databases overview. So a couple of things we talk about, what we'll be talking about when you look at the content of that, we talk around this idea of explosive growth of data. Um, first question would be, will data ever stop growing? I mean, it's, you know, we've seen, over the past 10 years, the volume of data it's in existence doubling every year or so. Well, that wasn't always the case. Right? And the question is, will it ever? Do you ever see a situation in a scenario where it would stop or slow, or maybe it will never stop? So I'm thinking around that. Um, Question of what drives data growth. So, one of the things when we talk around data, and you'll see it in the lecture discussion, there's 3 things that drive data. One is the ability to generate data, combined with the ability to store data, combined with the ability to use that data. All right. And that's having a combination of those 3 things is really those are really the things that have driven this explosive use of data. So wanted to go back and kind of say which one of those things is most important. Which one of those swings, assuming you have those 3 elements, which one do you think is the most important? Which one do you think will be the one that might cause things to slow or have problems moving ahead? This stuff, even though things have been working this way for about 10, you know, at least the past 10 years, there's no guarantee that this or maybe this will always be this way. Just some thoughts. And then finally, this question of how big is big. It's kind of a thinking exercise of, if think about the biggest thing you can ever think of, and, is it bigger than data? Just some, just kind of playing around a little bit with that, but just to kind of noodle on that, that thought, maybe put some ideas down around that. All right. And so two other things. Let's go back and look at the quizzes. The quizzes have been unlocked, so we should be up through. So we have the baseline evaluation quiz, which should be available. Quizzes 1 and 2, and quiz 3. All right, those are, and quiz 4. All right, we're not going to look at the Excel and Access quizzes yet. I want to take a look at. I'm trying to wrap my head around the best way to approach that. But I want to at least get through, the next piece, as it were, this week's worth of data, and I think we'll circle back and kind of see. Maybe we'll put together a little bit of a different approach with with that particular the data manipulation lab exercises. All right, but these 4 quizzes are open. All right, or the baseline evaluation quiz 1 and 2, 3 and 4 are all open, and need to complete these as we're going through the lectures each week and tracking kind of how we're doing, how we're completing against those. All right. If you'll note, we also have test number 1. All right. So what I want to do is I will probably look to bring test number 1. Probably do it like next Monday or sometime next week. All right, so it won't be this week coming up. So we'll be talking 1, 2, 3, because that actually it covers topics 1, 2, and 3. I want to get through topics 1, 2, and 3 this week. We'll probably pick a time next week. Probably the best way I'm going to do this is will designate a particular time. I'll unlock the test. You go out. You take the test. Okay, so that we'll work in the mechanics of, we'll work on, locking down the mechanics of exactly how we'll be doing this. All right, and I think that is about it for right now. If there's once again, any questions, contact me by email or by personal email or by text, either way. All right, thanks a lot, and we'll be in contact moving ahead. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon. Bye.